Most people who are eligible for Social Security benefits have a big decision to make when it comes time to do a little bit of retirement and financial planning. And that decision is, when should I file for Social Security benefits? As you might know, the amount of Social Security benefits you'll receive depends on the amount of money that you paid into the system while you were working through FICA, payroll, and self-employment taxes, and your age when you file for benefits. So when it comes time for you to file for your benefits, you march on into the Social Security Administration, you fill out some forms. The Social Security Administration takes a look at all the money that you've put into the system over your career. They right size that for inflation, they adjust everything for inflation, and then they run this calculation to determine your primary insurance amount. That's the amount of money that they'll pay you every single month for the rest of your life if you file for benefits on or at your full retirement age. As you might know, you can file for benefits as early as age 62 before your full retirement age if you want to. But for every month before your full retirement age, they'll permanently reduce your benefits. You can also postpone your filing and wait all the way up until age 70 if you want. And for every year that you delay filing, you accumulate what are called delayed retirement credits, and Social Security will permanently increase your benefit by 8% for every year that you delay, plus cost of living adjustments. Now, we talk to a lot of people in our financial planning practice who approach this problem assuming that they're just going to wait until 70. Because if you wait until 70, yes, you're giving up a few years of checks that you could otherwise be receiving. You're missing out on money earlier. But when the checks do start arriving, they're substantially higher. And the way the math works, if you live into your early to mid 80s, you'll have maximized the present value of your Social Security benefits by waiting until age 70. And that's what a lot of people default to. Well, in this video, we're going to challenge that idea, because in some circumstances, it's actually a really big mistake to wait until age 70. And that's not just if you're 62 and you're terminal and only have a couple of years to live. If that's you, you absolutely should be filing for benefits and collecting as many checks as you possibly can while you're still alive. There are a lot of other variables involved, and if you're doing a good job with your own retirement planning, you should be considering them all. So in this video, we're going to go through two hypothetical examples with very, very similar fact patterns. One of them will be Jerry Seinfeld, the other will be Elaine Benes, and we'll cover two scenarios that are similar but just different enough to where one person should wait until 70 and the other person should file earlier. So before you just assume that you're going to file at full retirement age or wait all the way up until 70 to maximize your delayed retirement credits, make sure you go through the exercise, and hopefully this video is a little helpful. So first off, let's take a look at the Social Security information. We're going to assume that Elaine and Jerry had identical careers. They made exactly the same amount of money, and just pulling a number out of a hat, their primary insurance amount is $3,690. So they've had work during their careers where they've paid into the Social Security system. Jerry, from his improv and stand-up work, of course, he pays self-employment taxes. Elaine may have had W-2 income that pays into the Social Security system. We're going to assume that after Social Security takes all their earnings history and adds it up and applies the inflation adjustments and calculates their primary insurance amount, their primary insurance amount is almost $3,700. Well, let's also assume that Jerry and Elaine were both born in 1960. Since they're born in 1960, that makes their full retirement age 67. So what that means between now and full retirement age for both Jerry and Elaine is that if they don't file until their full retirement age, they're not going to get any money from Social Security until they do. And then when they do, they'll get a little bit less than $45,000 every single year for the rest of their lives. And this number will go up every year with the cost of living adjustment that the Social Security Administration announces annually. Now, if on the other hand, they decide that they want to postpone all the way until 70, then obviously that means they've got a few more years here where they're not collecting checks from Social Security when they could. And by postponing, their benefits go up by 8% for every year that they delay, and they wind up with a larger amount, $55,000 and change, every single year when they do file. So if they file at full retirement age, they'll get about $45,000. If they wait a couple of years, they'll get $55,000. And what all the Social Security calculators online will tell you, what a lot of financial professionals will tell you, is that if you think you're going to live into your mid 80s, then you absolutely want to wait until 70 because you'll have collected enough larger checks by then to make up for those first 3 years where you were not collecting checks. And that might be the right course of action for some people, but financial and retirement planning is complicated and there are just a whole lot of variables involved. So let's start with Jerry. We're going to use a very simple profile here and assume that Jerry has a net worth of $2 million. He has all assets, no debt. He does not own a house. Let's say he's continuing to rent his apartment on the northeast side, Upper East Side of Manhattan, where he's been for the last 30 plus years. And let's assume that his assets consist of two different investment accounts, a taxable investment account worth about $500,000 and a 401k tax deferred that's worth about $1.5 million. Let's also assume that Jerry's got a pretty strong comfort level with risk. And so he has a lot of exposure in his investment accounts to stocks. And based on his asset allocation, we might expect that portfolio over a long period of time to return an average of 8% per year. Now, obviously, he's not going to get exactly 8% every single year. He may never actually get 8%. Some years he might return 15 or 20% if there's a good year in the markets. Some years the markets are going to crash. He might lose 10, 15, 30% before things recover. This is a long-term average expectation of 8% in the aggregate. So let's take a look at Jerry's cash flow to start. We made a whole bunch of assumptions here. Let's assume that Jerry and Elaine are both spending $10,000 a month. And what we're looking at here is a representation of their cash flow and needs every single year until Jerry gets to age 95. Let's also assume that Jerry lives in the state of California. So he pays federal income tax and state income taxes in the state of California. I'm using California because that's where I live. Now, what we're looking at here is a red line that denotes Jerry's total expected spending every year plus taxes. And you'll notice that that red line goes up a little bit every year, and that's due to two different things. Number one, we have inflation that's built into our forecast. But number two, Jerry's got a lot of money in his 401k that will be subject to mandatory distributions when he turns 75. And so in these early years, if he's going to file for Social Security at 67, and he's 64 right now, he's got a few years here where he's going to need to pay 100% of his living expenses by taking money out of his accounts. And generally what you want to do is take money out of the taxable accounts first to preserve the tax deferral inside the 401k. Now, if he files for Social Security at 67, that's what this dark blue portion is. So if he's filing for Social Security and has those checks coming in, he very simply needs to take less money out of his accounts to meet his living expense needs. Now, you might be wondering, what happens here in 2029, 2030? Why does the column jump in that year? The reason is this is the year when he would deplete his taxable investment account. Remember, he has $500,000 in a taxable account, $1.5 million in a 401k. So this is the year where he depletes that account and needs to start taking money out of his 401k instead. And as you might already know, every penny that comes out of that account will be subject to tax. So when we incorporate taxes, you simply need to take more out of the account to wind up with the same amount after tax. Now, the orange portion of these columns later on coincide with when he turns 75 and beyond. This is when mandatory distributions begin. And if he has a nice, steady growth rate of about 8% on his assets, his mandatory distribution will be over $100,000 in year one. And every single year that he gets older, he'll be forced to distribute a larger and larger portion of that account. That's why those columns get bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, we do have inflation incorporated in the model, but that's also why the red line gets higher and higher and higher and higher too, because you'll have to pay tax on those distributions. So if we map this out and expect 8% every single year, Jerry will get to age 95 with about $3.6 million in his portfolio. Plenty to live off of for most people. Now look what happens if we wait until age 70. If he waits until age 70, he actually loses value in the ending value of his portfolio when he gets to age 95. And there's two reasons for this. One reason is that he has 1/4, 25% of his portfolio in a taxable account and 3/4 in a 401k. And when we go back to the cash flow here, his probability of success actually goes up when we run a 1,000 trial Monte Carlo analysis. But when he waits until 70, that means that he's going to have to take more money for longer out of that taxable account. His taxable account will be depleted a little bit sooner, see in 2029 instead of 2030, and he'll have to take more money out of his 401k at an earlier age. And that's all subject to tax. So by waiting until 70, even though he'd be maximizing the present value of his Social Security benefits, theoretically, it would not be the most efficient from a tax standpoint. Now, you might be looking at this saying, we're talking about $150,000. That's or $135,000. That's a very small portion of the overall portfolio. And I'd say, yeah, that's fair. But look what happens when we adjust the expected return. Let's say that Jerry is in a really comfortable spot. He's comfortable taking investment risk. He wants to have more allocated to stocks. If we expect an 8.5% annual return, that has a drastic impact on the terminal value here when he's 95. He gains $1.75 million to his total portfolio over the next 30 years or so. But look what happens when we delay Social Security in that circumstance too. This number goes down by about $300,000. And the reason is when you wait until 70, you have to take more money out of the portfolio in those years that you're passing on checks. You could be collecting money, but you're not. And the higher the expected rate of return on your portfolio, the more you expect to get out of it, the more that difference might actually hurt you. Because if you can preserve the portfolio for longer and just let it grow and take advantage of that compound growth, that might actually exceed the added benefit to waiting until you're 70 for Social Security. And from a cash flow perspective, you can see how it impacts things too. Obviously, if we increase the expected return to 8.5%, it increases our chances of not running out of money. But it also means that we're going to have a bigger tax issue here down the road. It means that our mandatory distribution in year one is going to go up by a little bit. And every year subsequent to that, it might mean that we pay more in tax when we're older. Now, there are ways to manage that, of course. We could think about Roth conversions and doing some other strategies between now and then to minimize the long-term impact. But for Jerry, it may or may not actually be a good idea to wait until 70. And this is why we need to look at it. So let's take a look at Elaine Bennis in contrast. So here's Elaine Bennis. Elaine's got a very similar fact pattern to Jerry. She needs to spend $120,000 per year, just like Jerry does. She also lives in California. She also has a net worth of $2 million that consists of no cash or home equity, just for simplicity's sake. And she also has a portfolio of investments of $2 million. Now, a little different than Jerry, let's assume that Elaine has $500,000 of her portfolio in a 401k and $1.5 million in a taxable account. That's a little bit different. Let's say that I can't remember the name of her employers, Pendant Publishing might have been one of them. She's maybe worked at a place that didn't have a great 401k. She preferred to invest elsewhere. For whatever reason, she has more in taxable accounts than otherwise. So for Elaine, again, we're using the exact same spending assumptions. We're using the exact same inflation assumptions. And as a start, the exact same portfolio return assumptions. But Elaine's different because she has more of her accounts in taxable investments than she does in that tax-deferred 401k. So the result here is that if Elaine waits until full retirement age to file for benefits, she'll have a few years here where she needs to pull from her investments, but she's not going to have that big bump that we saw with Jerry because she's never going to deplete that taxable account in full. So she has 3 years here where she needs to pull money from the taxable account. And yes, she might pay tax on dividends, capital gains, and so forth, but it's kind of pales in comparison to the distributions from a tax-deferred account where every penny is taxed to you as income. And then at 67, she files for Social Security. She needs to take less out of the account at that point. She continues taking money out as she needs it from the taxable account, never totally depleting it until she turns 75 and mandatory distributions begin. Again, that's the orange column. Now that's when we see a slight jump in her spending because her tax situation is going to change. She'll be forced to take money out of the 401k, which adds a little bit to her taxable income and therefore her tax bill. And the size of this column just gets bigger and bigger and bigger every single year. So from Elaine's perspective, when we look at this on a long-term basis, everything looks pretty good. The numbers look like they're going up in general until her last few years of life, where the size of those mandatory distributions becomes a little bit larger. And if she waits until 70, she's going to gain value in her aggregate portfolio. Again, not a whole ton of difference, but it is something. Now, here she is waiting to file until she's age 70. When she does file, the size of the checks are bigger, but she's given up 3 years of those collections. And for her, this makes more sense before we even tinker with the rate of return. And the reason is that she has more money in taxable accounts that she can access without as much tax impact. Jerry didn't have that luxury. He had a lot of savings, the exact same amount of savings as Elaine did. But when he takes money out of the account, he has less taxable money to play with and has to start taking money from the tax deferred accounts, which changes his tax situation. So for Elaine, just off the cuff, it's a little bit better to wait until 70. Now, what happens if Elaine has a lower appetite for risk? She wants more bonds in her accounts. She's less comfortable with fluctuations in market crashes than Jerry is. Well, in her case, we might need to adjust the portfolio and reduce her return expectations. So if we assume she's not going to earn 8% per year, but only 6%, obviously that's going to change the long-term impact of her portfolio. And in fact, she's down about $2 million in terminal value by going from 8% to 6%. But even if we do that, if she delays until age 70, this value lost goes down and the terminal value of her portfolio goes up. Because again, even if we assume lower returns for Elaine than we did with Jerry, she has more money in taxable accounts that she can access. So my point in making this video is simply that when it comes time for you to decide when to file for Social Security, it's not quite as simple as just determining the maximum present value of benefits and then filing based on that formula. You need to incorporate the rest of your retirement and financial planning too, because how you decide to allocate and invest your portfolio matters. Your tax situation matters. How your investments lie, what accounts they're in matters. All this stuff needs to be thought of holistically in a bundle, in a nutshell, as opposed to one by one in isolation. So don't make that mistake yourself, and don't default to just assuming that you're going to wait until 70 or file as early as you can. This stuff needs to be considered when you make the decision for yourself. So I hope this was helpful. Make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel to get notifications when we post new stuff. We also have a quiz if anybody wants a quick and dirty way to figure out how much they need saved in order to retire themselves. We've got a quick and dirty calculator. You can click the link below to access it.